Hey, it's good to meet you.
Oh, likewise.
Thanks for spending some time so we can get to know you better. When did you start having an interest in being a musician?
So I should start in saying that I grew up in a musical household. My dad was a minister, and my mom, both of my parents played music in church a lot, but classical music wasn't really part of the family's musical landscape growing up. But I do remember seeing Itzhak Perlman on PBS and Yo-Yo Ma on Mr. Rogers when I was little, and it just grabbed a hold of me. Like something about it, I really wanted to start a string instrument when I was about 5 or 6. I grew up in a house that did not have a lot of money, so I waited. My parents had me wait until I was old enough to start in the public schools. And it's a funny story as to how I started playing viola, because we didn't have a lot of money, so our neighbor gave us a violin for me to start on. I got to school, turns out it was a viola. And my strings teacher said, all the interesting kids play viola instead of violin. And so me being a contrarian the way I was as a kid, I stuck with viola, and it just ended up being like an absolute perfect match for me in terms of the role it plays in music and just being able to, so once I started viola by accident, but it was a perfect accident.
What kind of music did your family listen to?
My dad would play a lot of gospel, Southern gospel music. I also loved listening to, and my dad had a large collection of Motown records growing up. And then occasionally, my older brothers would sneak in top 40 stuff and kind of like metal bands from the 80s and things like that. But a little bit of everything, but mostly it was everything but classical music, I guess you could say.
You grew up in North Dakota.
I did. I lived there until I was 24.
And as I recollect, it was in Minot, right?
Yep, that's correct. I grew up in Bismarck. I went K through 12 in Bismarck. I had a couple of years where I lived in Texas with my mom, and I did my undergraduate degree in Minot at a state school, Minot State University in Minot, North Dakota. So I did my bachelor's degree there.
Okay, so it was actually Bismarck that you pretty much grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Bismarck, graduated from high school in Bismarck.
Is there much of an opportunity in Bismarck to actually see the live classical music performed?
Yeah, actually, I started taking lessons when I was in 7th grade, and I took to it like a duck to water. They do have a kind of a semi-professional amateur orchestra, the Bismarck Mandan Symphony Orchestra. It's been around, I think, for nearly 60 or 70 years. And I myself played in it for several years at the end of middle school and all through high school, and even drove down and played through my undergraduate degree in the orchestra. I had an opportunity to kind of, make our attempt at a lot of great repertoire, made a lot of wonderful friends and colleagues during that time that I'm still in contact with to this day. It was a great experience, great introduction to a lot of orchestral music.
When you started to play, you were in public school. Did you have private lessons? All right.
I did. So in those brief years I lived in Texas, I started in 5th grade in the public schools. When I moved back to North Dakota in 6th grade, I continued on with just public school instruction in 6th grade. And in 7th grade, I started private lessons after school with my school orchestra teacher, Rosemary Person. So she ended up being a mentor of mine. And so I had her for middle school and high school orchestra, as well as private lessons up until 11th grade. And then I switched teachers to the teacher I had in college.
Was it an acceptable thing for a young man in North Dakota to be playing a musical instrument?
I think it wasn't necessarily the norm to be a really dedicated classical musician in North Dakota, but it was, I think what most people try to do is you find your people and you find your tribe. And there was, again, the orchestra, the BMSO was instrumental in that. There was also a very concentrated pocket of a lot of dedicated string players in North Dakota around that time that we all really fed off of each other. We were scattered all over the state, but we kept in contact. We kept each other on our toes. And and from that small group of people that were all clustered around 2 or 3 years, they now play in the Utah Symphony and the Cleveland Orchestra, all string players, an orchestra in Germany, the Dayton Philharmonic, all orchestras all over the place. We really pushed each other. So I was fortunate to have that cluster of like-minded teenagers around that time, and they're all still very, very dear friends of mine to this day. In fact, some of them actually live in Pittsburgh with me now.
Okay, all right. You went to undergraduate school.
Minot State University. I did a double degree with music and German studies, and then auditioned for several graduate schools, and decided on Carnegie Mellon for my master's degree in music. And that's how I ended up in Pittsburgh, and I've been in Pittsburgh ever since.
How long has that been?
This is coming up on my 15th year in Pittsburgh.
What was your goal once you got out of Carnegie Mellon? What did you want to do?
I think my goals were very similar to what a lot of students coming out of grad school for orchestral instruments. And I think that when I was in school, there was still, this is like I think the final stages of really pushing the old school of you prepare for orchestra auditions and try to get an orchestra job. There's a lot of lit and rep or a lot of excerpt classes, a lot of preparing for that. The classical music landscape has changed drastically in the past, I would say 15, 20 years. I think the conservatory system is just now starting to catch up. I quickly discovered that although I thought I was a strong player, my strengths did not lie in orchestral auditions. The really high pressure situation, the nature of practicing and preparation just wasn't a strength of mine. So I've always felt myself drawn to chamber music. And so I played in a string quartet for a while. We gave it a go for about 5 years. We did some, educational outreach. We did concerts. We did, collaborative projects. And then I did what actually a lot of students end up doing out of music school is you piece together a career doing a lot of different things. So I played in a lot of regional orchestras for a while, all the way up and down from Erie to all the way over to Johnstown and Canton and to way down into West Virginia. I had a private teaching studio with a lot of students, and I did, play gigs here and there. And eventually, by the time I got to the point where I decided I wanted to make a kind of a career pivot with kind of having music be something a little bit more ancillary rather than my main thing, I had basically whittled it down to teaching, subbing in the opera and ballet pretty regularly, and playing with a couple of other groups that really meant a lot to me, like Resonance Works Pittsburgh, and kind of kept it closer to home, so I wasn't driving so much, and kind of kept it to the performance opportunities that I was fortunate enough to be able to pick the ones that were really the most artistically satisfying, fit into my schedule the best, that type of thing. So I think the kind of jogging back to what I was talking about before, I think in general conservatories are more gearing towards the new reality for classical musicians, which is there's more and more students graduating from conservatory. The level of playing has never been higher. And the fact of the matter is there's less work to go around in a typical show up and play your Beethoven, Mahler, Mozart symphony type of orchestra job. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that the classical music industry is undergoing some metamorphosis and some growing pains, but I think it'll ultimately emerge as a more relevant art form when it's all said and done, and a more engaging, and one with a lower barrier of entry for a lot of people. So I think conservatories are catching up to that trend, but I kind of had to discover a career for myself outside of kind of pushing for that full-time orchestra job.
You were talking about auditions not being your strength. What does that mean?
I get very nervous when I have to perform. It's been something that I've dealt with for a very long time, and I'm fine after a couple of minutes. But oftentimes, by the time I calm down, the audition is over. So it's that ultra concentrated, ultra regimented style of preparation. You play everything to such a precise expectation that there's very, very little room for spontaneity. All very, very pre-planned. And it's just something that, as a musician, I wanted to have the flexibility to do things a little bit differently. Instead of saying, this is the way you prepare it, this is exactly the way you do it, this is the part of the bow, the fingering, the amount of vibrato you use, this is exactly, and then just do it exactly like this, and the audition panel will be happy. So I think it was a combination of the way that orchestral auditions are structured and the way the preparation has to be, and the combination of the fact that I really have struggled with nerves throughout my entire performing career.
Not hard to understand. I think I would probably be the same way. That it is intensely pressure filled. And I get what you're saying. A lot of people feel that working in symphony orchestras can be kind of soul killing, that it's week after week playing it the way somebody else wants it to be played, and that it can be it doesn't mesh with some people. Other people thrive in that environment. So it's I think it is good to have the flexibility to kind of carve out the kind of career that you want to have. I know a lot of musicians in Atlanta and nationally. For example, if you ask them, do you have an agent? They say no. They do everything on their own. They do their own bookings, they do their own arrangements, and so on. And I think when we hear of Columbia Arts Management going under, in some ways you can understand that because people have enjoyed that newfound flexibility that they have by controlling their own career. So I think what you're saying is the experience that at least I've heard about from a lot of other people.
I made this connection with in one of my organizational behavior classes in grad school when I went back, and I have an MBA from University of Pittsburgh now. And they were talking about what makes a satisfied employee. And one of the things they were talking about, the top things were a feeling of autonomy, that they can make decisions for themselves, the feeling that what they're doing matters and contributes to the whole, and a feeling that they have room for advancement within the organization that they're in. And those three things, you get a job as a tutti player in a string section, and opportunities to advance, maybe move to an assistant principal or principal position, is almost nil. I mean, maybe once in a decade, once every 10, 15 years, you have zero autonomy because you're told pretty much exactly how to do it by your section leader and the conductor. And you don't really get to pick what you're playing, or how you're playing it. And then the idea is, and then at a certain point when you're tenured, you could play in pretty much any way and you won't get fired and it won't matter. Mm-hmm. And it is the unfortunate reality for a lot of the people that have been in that orchestra. And so you can see why you get people that are very dissatisfied if you look at it from that kind of organizational behavior perspective. I myself, one of the reasons that I chose to kind of find a new chapter with my career was that I was realistically, I had gotten to the point where I knew I wasn't going to get a full-time orchestra job. I had the opportunity to do the operas and ballet gigs that I really love doing, and I still continue to do, but it wasn't enough to kind of, pay the bills completely. I love teaching, but I wanted to maybe pare that back a little bit. And staying within the Pittsburgh area, I had functionally kind of maxed myself out for the type of work that I was doing realistically. And so I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to be able to play a little bit. And just for me personally, I wanted to be able to stick my instrument down and pick it back up. and really not feel like I had to take everything that came my way. As a freelancer, we often get a lot of pressure to take everything that comes your way, work as much as possible, because next time they might not ask if you say no. I think a lot of freelancers burn themselves out that way, but it's also a necessity because I myself have contracted gigs, and if somebody says no, even if I think they're a wonderful player, if they say no a couple times, I'm just going to skip over them because I don't need to deal with the back and forth. So it's an unfortunate paradigm, but something that I didn't want to continue for the next 30 years until I retired. So I decided I needed a change. For some people, they thrive on that. It's something that they really love. Music is their social life, is their professional life, is their kind of hobby. And so, but for me, I have a lot of varied interests, and wanted the opportunity and the kind of wiggle room and the flexibility to be able to pursue those things.
So you do have a full-time job.
I work as a costing and data analyst for a logistics company in town, Pitt, Ohio. I've been in that position, finished my master's degree last August, about actually a year ago. And then took a while I was working at a part-time position while I was finishing up school with them, and then started a new position with them in January. And had my first 3 months of cubicle life, and then COVID hit, so I've been working from home since then.
And how's the working from home?
Well, I think everybody can attest to or can empathize with the adjustment period. I don't have kids, so that's been a lot easier, I think, in that respect. I can't imagine trying to work from home with having children. So a lot of respect to the people out there that do. But it was an adjustment at first. It was, for me, it was easy to get distracted. But after an adjustment period and kind of giving yourself a good office space to work in, and getting used to the idea of having kind of compartmentalizing your day. Now I'm at work, now I'm at home. It works, and I love it, actually. I love the opportunity to be at home and have a little bit more flexibility with how I use my time throughout the day. If I want to start extra early, I can. If I want to, work a little extra late, I can. It's nice. And I'm fortunate that I live very close to that actual office, so if that time comes, I need to go back in, it'll be there. But I wouldn't mind working from home at least several days a week permanently. I think it can work with the type of work that I do, and I enjoy it. My personal opinion is, not just the company I work for, but kind of as a national trend, this is kind of a catalyst moment for something that has been happening for a while. I think work from home and remote work has been on the rise for several years, but this really, I think, pushed it over the edge. And I think that for a lot of people will want the opportunity to work from home and have that flexibility. I think the trade-offs for happier employees, a little bit more flexibility, more job satisfaction, I think it's something that's going to be here to stay for the foreseeable future, or from now on, because I think there's a lot of positives.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was that you posted some pictures on Facebook a few weeks ago about, I assume it's your hobby. Is it right to call what you do as a hobby?
Yeah, I think it's a hobby. It's a passion of mine. It's a very all-encompassing hobby, because it's kind of a little bit of everything every single day, but something I love.
How did you get into bodybuilding?
It's something I've actually been interested in for a long time, but I always enjoyed staying active, but the weightlifting stuff was something I always wanted to pursue seriously. But I was very kind of wrapped up in what people would think, because it's very much against type of how people know me. People know me as a kind of a bookish, kind of nerdy type, I guess you could say, very academic. I mean, I love Star Trek. I play viola for a living, so it kind of goes against type. But I think a lot of people can attest to this, whether you want to call it a midlife crisis or whatever. You get to a certain point in life and you think there's certain things you want to do that if you don't do it, you will regret it. Whether that's, for some people, buying a sports car. For me, it was bodybuilding. I just decided almost exactly 3 years ago that I was going to do it and just see what happens and give myself some time and I love it. I think I have a lot of fun doing it. I enjoy the challenge, the structure of it, and I think there's an awful lot of overlap between the way that one has to approach getting to the point of being a professional musician and being able to kind of, build your physique to the extent of being able to do, a competition or to be competitive on a regional or national level. So I've carried over a lot of those things, and just a lot of the aspects of, delayed gratification, discipline, day in and day out, kind of you having to just enjoy the process rather than the end results, or because the process is what gets you the end result. The idea of like, you can't make up stuff once the day is done. You can't get that practice time back or that gym time back, or you can't play catch up for eating a meal or what have you. So it's just, I think the overlap between the two has been a lot.
You've been at it 3 years?
Yes. So still very much kind of a beginner, I would say, beginner and novice. I started older than normal, 35, which is considered very old for for a bodybuilder. But it's, like I said, it's a hobby, it's a passion of mine, something that I enjoy doing. A lot of great people in the sport, met a lot of great people. Yeah, it's just something that I enjoy, the challenge, pushing
So do you
myself.
go to the gym every day?
5 to 6 days a week. And if I'm preparing for a show, which I just did my first one last week, what's typical is that you do cardio, like, walking on a treadmill or whatever. For me, is walking in the cemetery by my house in the mornings, and then you go to the gym in the afternoon or evening, and then you do more cardio after you're done lifting. And you weigh everything out where you eat, and you control pretty much every variable of your kind of physical existence while you're preparing for a show. And really, it's a big game of mental discipline. And for for me, this I had a decent amount of weight to lose for this. So I did it over the course of 17 weeks.
It's interesting to me that you felt such anxiety performing or doing auditions. What about when you did your
Uh-huh.
first show? Did you feel that same kind of anxiety?
Well, the odd thing is I was not. I had a lot of anxiety, and I'd say leading up to it, just worrying that I wasn't going to be ready, that I wasn't going to look ready. But when the actual show itself came, I wasn't nervous. I think, and I was kind of reflecting on that, because I thought, well, why, if I've been such a nervous performer, both of these things matter a lot to me. But I think the thing was, the pressure was, one was a career and one is a hobby. And so I don't feel the pressure of having to put bread on the table as a bodybuilder, but I did feel it with taking auditions, if that makes sense.
Part of the pressure of being a breadwinner is the cost that you pay when you're working in a 9 to 5 job. I mean,
Yeah.
that takes away some of the joy from it.
Yeah. And for me, actually, the 9 to 5 has kind of allowed me to enjoy music and the lifting and the whole bodybuilding thing a lot more, because I don't feel this, at least especially with music, I don't feel the financial pressure of it anymore. And I have also the kind of financial autonomy to be able to just pick the things that really spark something in me artistically, something that I can really be passionate about. And I don't have to worry about taking just the thing that pays them. I've been able to play gigs that really just are artistically satisfying, and if I make a little bit of extra money on the side, that's great. But that has been a big transformation for me, is that I'm performing a lot less now, but the things that I do perform with, I just have so much fun doing it. And it
Good.
doesn't, and having less performances, each one is more of an event for me, instead of just checking something off a list and moving one on to the next thing. And so just kind of slowing the pace of the amount of music I was performing and having to put out has made me really value each performance a lot more.
Do you have goals that you've set for yourself in the bodybuilding area?
Yeah, so like I am a very much a goal and list person. When I first started 3 years ago, I said in 3 years, I want to be able to do a competition. And that was my first goal, and to hold my own. And I did that. So in going into closer to the competition, I said, I want to look a certain way, be able to present myself a certain way on stage, and just a lot of other small minor kind of into the weeds type of small goals. Going to the next stage, I work with somebody as I have a coach that I work with, and we were talking about it. It's just the goal is always maybe to add a little bit more size, just get a little bit bigger, be a little bit more competitive, bring more balance in to certain body parts, and just improve like the way you pose or present yourself on stage. And so there's always something to do. And then long term, my goal is to be able to be to the caliber that I can compete as a masters competitor, which is in the over 40 category, and be ready to do that on a national, be competitive nationally, or and do some of the bigger regional ones by the time I turn 40, which is in 2 years.
You do have a goal of trying to be the best
Yeah,
within that appeals to you.
absolutely. I've always been that way. If I've always been if I may quote one of my favorite philosophers, "Do or do not, there is no try." So uh, it's one of those things that I have the most fun doing something when I try to be the absolute very best that I can be. And that's how I get my enjoyment out of things. I'm not the type of person that will pick something up and just do it a little bit. I'm a whole hog type of person. So if I'm going to do something, my enjoyment comes with pushing myself as hard as I can. That's the way I've been with music. That's the way I was academically, going back to school, all through school. If I'm going to learn something, I want to learn it really well. If I enter bodybuilding, I'm going to try to be the absolute best that I can possibly be. And it's more, and so that idea of like self-challenge, self-actualization for something is very, very important to me. It's one of my, I think, primary values as a person. You know what I mean? So if I it's all about trying to do the absolute very best that I can, and to feel to progress year after year, and to and that struggle, that push to improve all the time.
You're of course aware of all the jokes about viola players, um,
Yes.
and
Very
I
much
was
so.
wondering if being a bodybuilder was compensation for the fact that you didn't play a violin.
So the thing is, the other stereotype for a violist is that we all have a side thing. It's like if we always do something else just because we have the time because our music's not as hard. But so maybe this is my side thing. I got time for this. So if I was a violinist, I'd have to spend all my time practicing.
So you do have a coach.
Yes.
How frequently do you see the coach?
We check in with each other via either FaceTime or calls about once a week. Leading up to the competition, it was like several times a week, and the week leading up to is every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. I'm in Pittsburgh. He's in the Cleveland area. So, and about once a month during my kind of off season, I'll drive out there and just we'll work out together. We'll check in on everything in person, talk, kind of regroup. But other than that, we do check in once a week.
What's the purpose of the coaching?
I think there's two things. One is a measure of accountability. You have an external source that you're accountable to, and you get feedback from. And the other thing is you get somebody that really gets to know your body for you, because I think oftentimes, especially lifters, musicians can be this way too, is that you just kind of sense of self-awareness sometimes cannot be the greatest, because I tend to be very self-critical, hypercritical. And so it's that whole like hearing yourself play, you just hear all your flaws. looking at pictures of yourself as a bodybuilder, you just see flaws. And so having an external eye, somebody who's been doing this for a long time, to say you're where you need to be, or you're not where you need to be. And so it's a measure of accountability, and it's also kind of structuring your diet and your workouts, and I think what a lot of beginning bodybuilders tend to do is they tend to make too many adjustments, too many changes too often, because the progress is not really measured in weeks. Most often it's measured in like several month chunks. So just having somebody to keep you on track and just to kind of reinforce, sticking with the plan, making small adjustments as necessary, but not really going, jumping from one thing to the next.
Is there something about bodybuilding that has informed your viola playing, or vice versa?
The lessons I've taken from music are the idea of process. You just have to put in the time every single day, and you're not going to be great at it when you first start. As anybody who's played a string instrument can attest, the first couple of years are usually pretty painful, and the reward comes after several years of just diligent work, and the noticeable results come after years and years of constant work. Those lessons from music are the carryover from music into bodybuilding. It's been huge. It's been huge. One of the things I have noticed is, on the other end of it, is being much more physically aware of how I'm sitting, how I'm standing, just much more aware of my physical self when I play, and what is ergonomic, what is not ergonomic, being aware of just how your body works or should work and doesn't work, and just basic, I think, proprioceptive awareness, and just kind of being more in touch with your physical self, and not taking your physical self for granted. I'm sure you've heard several musicians that have had injuries, problems playing, and that this is one thing that I'm much more aware of, is just kind of being more, taking care of your body a little bit more, and being more aware of it as you're playing.
And in fact, I have heard that a lot about particularly the repetitive motion injuries that some musicians have. Good meeting
All
with
right,
you.
talk
Good
to you
talking
later.
with you.
Likewise.
Take care.
Right, bye.